And turning back to state politics now, talk at the Capitol this week was dominated by the surprise tax cap proposal that Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver rolled out on Tuesday. Now, the bill called for a hard cap that business leaders have been calling for years now. And when it was released, many of them actually joined the governor, Silver, and Senate Majority Leader Dean Skelos for a very quickly called press conference. Among them were my next guests, two of them actually. Brian Sampson is the executive director of Unshackle Upstate. He is joining us from Rochester. And Mike Durant is the new New York director of the National Federation of Independent Businesses. Gentlemen, thank you very much for making time for us.
Thank you, Liz.
Thanks for having us, Liz.
It's my pleasure. Okay, so we will start, Mike, with you, since you're making your debut here. Congratulations,
right.
By the way.
Thank you.
You've replaced Mike Elmendorf, who has moved on to other things.
Right.
Is there actually a deal? Because to me, it's a little confusing. We heard that there's a framework, it's tentative, it's conceptual, but the longer we wait, it seems like the better chance it has of falling apart.
Well, and I think that both Brian and I share that concern, that the longer that we wait, the more times, more opportunity that groups that are against this are going to come out and continue to wage a campaign against it.
Sure.
I think that what we're seeing is a conceptual agreement, as both, I think Brian and I were both briefed on the details Monday night and early Tuesday before that press conference, and we issued our support of the conceptual agreement, and now we're looking to see action, and I think the stalling, to reiterate the rhetoric that we've used for the last 4 months, is just hurting small business owners and taxpayers.
Brian, can you tell me, I mean, it looks like the longer that we wait, the more chances there are that something gets tweaked. For example, NYSET is now trying to get in there and change that 60% mark where you would actually be able to blow through the tax cap with something lower. And you hear the speaker now suggesting that the conceptual sunset in which the cap and the rent laws coexist together would actually be some sort of hard date. I mean, I would assume either of those changes would be a deal breaker for you. Is that right?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct, Liz. And when you look at what we have to be very cautious of and what we have to protect against are those taxpayer-dependent organizations that want things to remain as they are. They want the status quo to be in place. They don't want the cap in place because they know it's going to drive hard, and I guess conflictual changes both for local governments and school districts that they don't want because they have an inherent interest in keeping things as is. I think what we have to look at and what we have to make sure exists for the rest of this time is that it is a 2% hard cap. The 60% override remains in effect. There is the carryover provision from year to year. That's what New Yorkers need now more than anything else. We don't need games. We don't need politics. Let's get this cap passed and let's get it in place so that we can start our recovery.
Hold on, though. Two things. First of all, just Brian, to you, is there any wiggle room here at all? In other words, if this bill changes, and this isn't the final bill, and there is a bill, there's actually bill language, if it changes at all, is there any room in there for you to still be able to support a deal that might be tweaked in some way?
Well, I think if the basic components of the deal, the financial components of the deal remain as is, I think it's something that we can certainly be flexible on. What we would certainly prefer is that it be a permanent cap. If there has to be something done where it's tied to another piece of legislation, as long as it doesn't impact the financial part of this bill, I think it's something that we would try to find a way to support. However, if it does go to a place where it gets watered down, I think you'll see Mike and myself and other organizations really take a good hard look at it and determine where we're going to be on the issue.
Mike, for you and for NFIB, is that similar? Is there any wiggle room here, any margin of error off this bill that we saw early this week to whatever ends up coming down the pike?
Well, I think that both Brian's organization and NFIB were bullish on the governor's program bill, the first property tax that we've talked about ad nauseum. And then now we've seen a change, and I think that the business community, at least for where I represent, has offered somewhat of a little concession, because obviously this is about 98% of a hard cap. It's not entirely what the governor proposed.
Nope.
So we have negotiated to there. There obviously is some linkage to that, so to speak, and we haven't come out and been heavy-handed in negating that. So we've already shown that we have been willing. Now, if you start making changes from this bill going forward, we're going to have to take a good hard look. And if the changes are, like Brian said, substantial, it's probably going to be something that we're not going to be as likely to support.
You know what I don't understand here, and either of you can jump in on this, it seems a little bit difficult to try and link a cap with rent control but not have a rent control bill. In other words, if you want the senator the Senate Majority Leader, Gene Skelos, to sign off on something he doesn't like, you might want to present him with something so he could at least take a look at what he's supposed to be signing off on. Why would he want to pass a tax cap and then get in trouble on the other end?
Well, Liz, I'll talk about that first. Rent regulations clearly aren't an issue for our organization. I don't believe they are for Mike's organization as well. But we understand the politics that exist in New York State and that there's always a compromise that takes place. What we have to make sure, though, is at the end of the day, regardless of what gets determined behind closed doors, we have a hard cap in place, and it's a hard cap that doesn't have a lot of wiggle room and you can't drive a truck through, and that it helps us go on to the next phase of our program, which is the mandate relief, which is going to be the critical component for our local governments and our school districts.
Okay, before we get there, though, I mean, you might not be able to drive a truck through it, but maybe you could drive like a Vespa, because it's not actually a 2% cap. With that pension exemption there, even though it's not a massive pension exemption, it would bring the 2% in some cases up to 3%, and that's not hard, is it?
But I think there's also some consideration here that we're looking at going forward. Where's the market? I think a lot of what we're dealing with today is because the market underperformed, and that has pension issues. I think as we go forward, those pension issues get smoothed out a little bit as the market recovers. You know, there is some talk of a Tier 6 if that were to come into place. There's some things going forward that we think will make this a much better cap and likely the strictest cap in the country. And I think if you had asked us at the beginning of the year if we said New York would have the strictest property tax cap in the country, I think a lot of people would have scratched their head and said no way. But we're right there. We're right on the cusp. And what we need everybody to do is understand this is a critical piece for the recovery of New York State. The business community needs it. The taxpayers are demanding it. The polls are indicating it. It's time to put the cap in place.
Mike, can you actually explain, it seems to me, and I know mandate relief was something that Brian just brought up, and I know it's important particularly to local elected officials who have been saying, if you put a cap in place without mandate relief joined to it, we're going to go broke. And they've said that on numerous occasions to the lieutenant governor, who used to be a mayor, of course, and he said we needed to put a stake in the ground. We needed the cap to come first. Do you think, though, it weakens the argument? Once you get a piece in place and it's a done deal, what's your negotiating power? Where do you get mandate relief for? The pressure for it is gone.
Well, I disagree because I think that what you're going to see is, I mean, we saw school districts and municipalities with the state budget after that budget was enacted, which we were supportive of, that didn't have a tax and fee increase. You know, talking about cuts in services and looking at different things. And we've had the governor out there talking about cut the fat and build the muscle in some of his news conferences. So I think that what we're going to do is once this cap's in place, it's going to force right sizing government. It's going to force relief for school districts and local municipalities in a lot of different areas, especially in areas that are captured within the cap, such as pensions and health benefits. I think New York is heading towards a cliff, like many states across the country are, and putting a hard cap in place is finally going to force that critical political dialogue for comprehensive mandate relief.
Okay, but Brian, what if it doesn't? What if it takes a number of local governments, like, for example, Onondaga County or Syracuse or any of those guys where you've had a local elected official say it'll be a year to 2 years before we're under Financial Control Board control, which is like something that we've seen in Nassau County, of course, and also in Buffalo. I mean, is that what it's going to take? It's going to take governments going broke to put mandate relief back on the front burner?
Well, I would certainly hope we wouldn't wait to get to that point. And I would say let's go back, you know, probably over 2 decades. And these mandates have been out there. They've been a problem for a long time. We've talked about them for a long time, and nobody's done anything about them. In fact, we've probably gotten more mandates put on top of the ones we had. That's why we've said we need the cap first. So now it looks like we have that cap. It's going to be in place. Our organization just last week advanced 9 opportunities of very practical solutions on the mandate relief side, ones that will go a long way towards helping local governments and school districts fix those issues. We're going to continue to push those, but of course we won't be able to move those things around without that cap being there, and that's been our argument all along. I know it's been Mike and NFIB's argument that the cap will drive the rest of the discussion, that's being the mandate side of it. We know it's an uncomfortable position for some of our colleagues to be in. We appreciate that, but New York hasn't done anything about the property tax issue in a long time. They haven't done anything about mandates in a long time. We now have a governor, a leader, and the speaker who all seem to say, okay, we're there, let's get this thing done. That's what we're going to encourage them to do. We need all the voters to stay engaged, to talk to their assembly members and their senators and tell them they want the cap done.
Okay, well, right now, as we mentioned, we haven't seen either house actually pass a bill. We're seeing some squishiness kind of happen around the edges of this tentative agreement.
Sure. Right.
It may or may not get done in the next week or so. It may fall apart and get put back together. We've seen that a lot. What are you going to be doing? I mean, during the campaign, for example, you guys teamed up with the Business Council, actually, and did a lot of mailings and did some targeted lobbying. Will you be doing something along those lines in hopes of pressuring lawmakers on this issue?
Well, I think that both Unshackle and NFIB and the Business Council, among some other groups, have been pretty steadfast in our position on the property tax cap, probably talking about this daily with either legislators or members of the media. And we've had our members out there advocating their local assemblymen or assemblywomen and senators on this issue. It's 82% of NFIB members support it. They know that we're close. They support this conceptual agreement, and we're going to continue the pressure on because, as we said kind of at the beginning, the longer we wait, the opponents are going to sense maybe a chance that they could get in and disrupt this process, and we're not going to allow them to do so.
You know, and really, though, the problem is your challenge for 2010, which you started to do, was to create a political entity that would be actually a counterweight to some of the unions. I mean, NYSET is very, very strong,
right.
and they're very, very angry
right.
with the Assembly Democrats, with whom they've been allied for a number of years now, and they're on the warpath. So if they go around threatening people, you're going to have to come back, Brian, and we'll give the last word to you, and say, look, we endorsed
Sure.
the governor last time around. Actually, the Business Council did endorse the governor. We
Right.
could help you. We
Right.
could be a counterweight to NYSET. But can you be? NYSET is very powerful, and they got a lot of money.
Well, I think, we demonstrated both with NFIB, the Business Council, other partners, that the business community and taxpayers have finally reached the point where they want a government that's responsible to them and for them. And,
Right.
and we're going to get there, and we're going to continue to do this. This will be a signature issue on our scorecard. It's something that we're going to continue to push. We've just activated another e-advocacy campaign to get people to be able to sign up and send notes to their elected officials. I mean, that's what we worked very hard to do in 2010. Do we have the same financial resources that some of those taxpayer-dependent organizations have? No. In fact, they're using our own dollars against us. But what we have and what we believe is the greatest tool is the voters. They're engaged. They're looking for their government to send a good sign. We started to see it with the budget. We have a governor that's being very fiscally responsible with what's going on. We have both houses similar circumstances. So as long as the voters remain engaged and continue to talk to their elected officials, we're going to get the results we need. And it's just, we have to move this thing along inch by inch, step by step. But we're going to get there. We've got the taxpayers on our side. The voters are engaged. And we'll get this thing taken care of.
Well, we will see, obviously. There's not that much time left in the session. It's ending on the 20th, and now that the rent laws actually expire on the 15th, and they seem to be linked to this thing, it's
Right.
actually shorter of a timeline than that. I want to thank you guys. Mike Durant, thanks very much.
Thank
and
you.
Brian Sampson, thank you for being with us this evening.
Always a pleasure, Liz.
Thanks, Liz.